We are recording. Okay, so today we're going to continue talking about the patterns of software book, and today's chapter is the Bead game Rugs and Beauty.
This is a nice chapter.
Eh, it would not be my top one, but that's okay. So, in this chapter, we're going to investigate, we're going to discover the process in which Christopher Alexander started to consider the quality without a name to be an objective measure. So, let's see. So, is there anything that is important here? Yeah. So, last
Uh,
chapter we discovered the failures from his previous attempt with the Modesto and Mexicali projects. And one of the first hypotheses that happened there was that there was some sort of looseness of the in the process, and looseness in the sense of the people doing the project that Alexander was not the head of. They were kind of not on the same understanding as Alexander, and that brought the hypothesis of like, okay, maybe these people are not worthy of attempting to lead a project of this nature.
uh, I think it's more so the case that they need to be better to do that, like skill issue, I guess, in some
Well,
sense.
we said the same thing, but I used the word worthy because it's kind of like if we say it's a skill issue, we can't describe the skill. So
That's fair.
uh, it's that's a problem. But anyway, then we go back to okay. This is actually pretty important as well to mention. So we go to like maybe it's not only a representational thing, but also a cognitive thing. So maybe it's embedded in our brains the recognition of this property, although we have a hard time to describe it. And then the feeling that is the feeling great form in art gives us would be a result of the form operating directly on us and in us rather than indirectly through nature. And nature would share the same forms because the principle is universal. And then we go through well uh, to a quote that goes back to philosophers considering this hypothesis, which is unsurprising, not surprising at all. Um, yeah. So, but now the revelation that perception in itself is itself a pattern selecting and pattern making function. Gestalt formation, which is basically a complex system. That pattern is inherent in the physical structure and functioning of the nervous system. That matter itself analyzes into coherent patterns of arrangements of molecules, and that the gradual realization that all these patterns are effective and ontologically significant by virtue of an organization of their parts, which can only be characterized as aesthetic. All this development has brought works of art and natural phenomena on to an identical plane of inquiry. Yeah, so this is again the same kind of like I think I mentioned this before in the previous session that aesthetic has a different meaning. Like people, especially in the programming community, they think that aesthetics is just something not worth to pursue because they view aesthetic and pragmatic like like one being the antithesis of the other, so they don't see value in it.
First of all, I, well, I'm pretty sure you as well don't really see that opposition. Like, I have no idea where that idea that those two are in opposition comes from. It's confusing to me.
Well, the opposite. I
But
know, like I disagree with the opposition, but I know where it comes from. It comes from the I premise that something like if you're doing something pursuing aesthetics, you're gonna make it in non-habitable for other people that don't see the doesn't have exactly the same vision as you. So the most common example is the use of point tree notation. So if you're doing Haskell, uh, you're gonna see that it's kind of like very uh, common sense to say that you should be careful when going too far into point 3. So if you're using the OW operator, for example, I don't know, I don't even know if it is called the OW in like officially. Let's see. Nope. But it is essentially like this. You see what's going on there?
Isn't the owl the one with the apply in the middle instead of the second compose?
Well, I heard this is the OW because it looks like one. Maybe this is too well. Yeah, maybe this is too small. I can open a terminal. So I'm saying
No, I
that
see. It's a compose of composes, essentially.
yeah. So you say that I don't know. This is equal to whatever this, and if you ask for the type of such thing, there it is. So if you're going, if you're considering using the OWL, let's call this the OWL just for this session only. You should think twice because it's gonna look fancy, but people is gonna have a people who when I say people when people say people they say like the general Haskell developer they will have a hard time understanding what the heck is going on, right? But it will look
Uh,
great, right? Because it's basically gonna be I don't know function one, and then oops, and then you do this, and then function two, and that's gonna be your function three definition.
it's kind of silly that you have to go through all this trouble just to deal with the fact that functions only take one parameter.
Well, yes, this is because of currying. Yes, actually, this is more because of how this operator works, the type of that.
No,
Uh,
but this is literally saying, okay, I have a function that takes two arguments and returns one result, and another function that takes one argument and returns one result, and I want to compose them, right?
yes, essentially yes.
This looks weird because Haskell is curried. If you
Well,
were working at the level of tuples, this would be pretty straightforward, actually.
yes,
In
if
fact,
you're
it would just
yes,
be normal composition, in fact.
yes, if you're using tuples because a tuple is considered a single like bundled element, you could just use normal composition. Like I said, this is because of the type of compose specifically. Anyway, so that was just an example. So that conversation of aesthetics, one example is the AL operator, which is basically like compose of composes. People see that as an aesthetics that it doesn't bring like pragmatic value, whatever they mean by that. I think what they mean, I actually have a better notion on how to describe what I think they mean because they themselves cannot explain it, which is habitable software, which is the whole point of Gabriel, right? So in the previous chapters, we've seen his argument an argument being made of you should try to make software habitable, and that includes people getting up to speed fast. And my criticism on that is that the people that are gonna attempt to go into that, they suck. What are you gonna do about that then? How can you distinguish that the people just saying this is not habitable, that they have a skill issue, or your stuff is just not reasonable and not habitable. In the case of the owl, this line is kind of like arbitrarily made via the community. So if you're doing the owl, you're not being habitable. You were the problem, not the developer. Uh, but there are two
Well,
things, two problems with that. First, this is still arbitrary, and that was like mostly like a community decision. And second, what about the other cases?
there's also the third point, which is fourth programmers are now laughing at Haskell programmers that they find composition with IRC2 functions to be confusing.
The word is not confusing. If you the people that are not used to it, they can spend up to 45 minutes go in the repo and they will eventually understand it. They just see that investment of time as not worthy. Like making the developer go through all of this understanding process just because you wanted to use a fancy operator, they think more like an egotistical thing. You are doing it to flex because you know about the L or whatever, and it's not worth the time in making a newcomer understand what it is. It is just to make you feel good about yourself. That's how people understand this. Like in half an hour, like if you play with the types just a little bit, you can get it. It's not like a PhD thesis. But that's why the opposition comes in. The aesthetics word is usually in the context in which they are being something is being made just to someone to make something look fancy or to flex or to feel good about themselves. And then the other people call themselves pragmatic, saying that pragmatic engineering was not done with aesthetics in mind. But what I find funny with that statement is that uh, they understand then that good software is aesthetically pleasing just because of a coincidence. Then, like they don't see that one causes the other. It's not a causality relationship being established. They just see it's purely and merely, utterly a coincidence.
That's very sad.
Well, I find
It's
it funny.
especially it's especially sad coming from people working on a very abstract domain like programming.
But that's the thing. That's exactly the thing. I think that people don't understand programming as an abstract thing. That's
But it is.
exactly no. Yes, if you go pedantically with the meaning of the words, they will say, of course it is, but you know what I mean. Like they are using the incorrect words to describe what they want to say, and what they want to say is that they want something to be concrete and empirical and palpable and um, like the barrier of entry being the lowest as possible. That's what they want programming to be.
But that's not what it is.
I understand that's not what it is, but that's what they want it to be. And to some degree, that actually happened, right? So the commoditization of programming as an activity and a job is the result of this happening. The barrier of entry, in fact, is actually lower than before. The problem is that we are now trying to, like, if you look at the whole vibe programming with LLMs, for example, that is an attempt of putting this bar even lower than what it is now. Like,
Look,
because
I
now you at least need to understand the code, right? You need to know what is happening, at least in a copy paste kind of sense. The
right.
LLM's approach is like you don't need to understand the code now.
The problem I have with all of that is that okay, lowering the barrier of entry is fine, but you have to be careful not to also lower the ceiling of skill that you can achieve, right? Which vibe coding totally does.
Totally does. No. I'm not. Well, I know you know this, but just for the record, I'm not saying vibe coding is a good thing. I think it's a symptom of a greater problem, which is that people don't
But
understand that there is a floor. There is a floor. And they don't also understand that attempting to lower the floor has a consequence on the ceiling. They think it's those two things are disassociated from themselves. So you can lower the floor as you want, and they don't even understand that there's a consequence on the ceiling. That's the problem. That's exactly and precisely the problem.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, let's continue because this chapter is kind of long. But this is a good stuff. This is very good stuff. So anyway, Alexander took this point of view seriously and proposed the beat game conjecture. So, uh, if our grasp of the word is to remain coherent, we need a beat game, and it is therefore vital for us to ask ourselves whether or not a beat game can be invented. With a beat game, he means the imaginary game in which all forms can be represented in a single way. So we are kind of going into the religious kind of realm with this, because we are attempting to find a lens in which we can view everything by it, and that's what Magetta talks about with the forms and stuff like that, which is as a lens to understand everything essentially. Um, and then we go back to the previous chapter, in which we had two things. We're going to go through two things about that last chapter. The first was that the level of mastery of the pattern language and of the building and design skills needed to produce the quality of the name were in fact limited in the folks doing the work. And the second was that the participants did not sufficiently appreciate the geometrical aspects of beauty and the quality. So that's what I meant by not being worthy to do the job, because they had like it's all mind like especially if you read where it is. Uh, where it is. I realized that there were some things about which the people putting up the buildings did not know, and I knew implicitly as part of my understanding of the pattern languages. They were just a bit too casual about it, and as a result, the work was in danger of being too relaxed. That's what I think you always run when you talk about abstract stuff. When you talk about abstract stuff, and people like, and the people in the conversation don't really understand what's going on, they they kind of lose precision by the by a, via being the consequence of their misunderstanding. So, and I think you can only achieve the precision with the abstracts part if there is some sort of training involved of some intimacy between the participants. So, if I'm talking something abstract and I know how Magetta and Marinho behaves when I'm talking about that stuff, I can understand if they get it and if they don't. But if I give you a manual and I don't know you, and you have to follow the manual and reach your own conclusions about it, me being the person that gave you the manual, I run the risk of your misunderstanding implicating a, a loose in precision of the job, which is exactly what happened, which is that people just were too casual about it and too relaxed. They thought it was just vibes. Like they didn't they didn't have this sort of training from Alexander to understand that what this guy is actually talking about. You even ran the risk of saying, "Man, this guy is talking for half an hour, and I understand the words that he's saying, but I don't know what he means. But he wants me to follow these rules as an architect. Okay."
That sounds ridiculously sad, actually.
Yeah, but I think you run this risk every time because that's the problem of like the whole hypothesis of being able to automatically like generative quality without a name thing. You if it is like there are the two options. Either it isn't generative and you need some special conditions, which is what we're going to go through, or the recipe is very hard to achieve. Like maybe even impossible to achieve in human time. But well, we tried. We try. He tried. Alexander tried to make that happen. Okay. Let's actually read this last chapter here as well. So the other point is that even although the theory of pattern languages in traditional society clearly applies equally to very great buildings, like cathedrals, as well as to cottages, there was the sense that somehow our own version of it was tending to apply more to cottages. In part, this was a matter of the scale of the projects we were working on, but it also had to do with something else. It was almost of it as if the grandeur of a very great church was inconceivable within the pattern language as it was being presented. It's not that the patterns don't apply, just that somehow there is a wellspring for that kind of activity which was not present in either a pattern language or the timeless way of building. So the patterns are there, but it's almost like the patterns are a consequence of something else, and this something else is what we're trying to achieve, which is well,
Yeah,
it's a very it's a sad conclusion anyway because that means that it's hard, like it's even harder than we thought. Um,
I was gonna make a reference that it's hard and nobody understands, but clearly some people understand, so I'm not gonna do that.
I don't think you understand is the correct word as well. I'm being pedantic today, but here it is. I think they don't understand. They recognize it, but they don't understand.
Hmm.
Because if they did understand, uh, I think it would be easier to have any sort of description of anything. We don't have any. Like, we can recognize something, but don't understand it. Like, if you look at something and it's weird, you can recognize it is weird, but you may not know why or how that came to be. You may look to something else and say, this is just as weird as that, but I can't describe both. Like, that's kind of the
Hmm.
situation that I think Alexander was in. He was looking at a bunch of things and recognizing something similar in all of them, but he couldn't put into words exactly what it was. And he attempted to do the reverse engineering of saying, okay, I don't know what it is, but I also recognize that these things that have this property also have patterns, common patterns among them. And then what he did, which is understandable, is let me try to replicate these patterns like in a manufacturer, like in a factory kind of a way.
Let's
Uh,
put them in a book, essentially.
yeah, and let's try to reproduce them like ad hoc and see what happens. With the failures was that they had the patterns, but they didn't have the quality without a name, and they had some funkiness to it, whatever that means. So I think it's more about that we recognize something that we don't yet understand, which is kind
So
of
it is
weird.
hard. So it is hard and nobody understands. Okay.
Exactly, it is hard and nobody understands. Hmm. If you compare these buildings, the ones with the quality of the name, with the buildings of our present era, there is much more variety and more detail. There are more internal differences among the parts. There are rooms with different sizes, doors of different widths, columns of different thickness according to their place in the building, ornaments of different kinds in different places, gradients of window size from floor to floor. The, the character is marked, in short, by greater differences and greater differentiation. But it is marked above all by special balance between order and disorder. There is a perfect balance between straight lines and crooked ones, angles that are square and angles that are not quite square, and equal and unequal spacing. This does not happen because the buildings are inaccurate. It happens because they are more accurate. The similarity of parts occurs because the forces which create the parts are always more or less the same. But the slight roughness and unevenness among the similarities come from the fact that the forces are never exactly the same. And it is marked in feeling by a sharpness and a freedom, and a sleepiness which happens everywhere when men and women are free in their hearts. It is not necessarily complicated, it is not necessarily simple. It comes simply from the fact that every part in whole in its own right. Yeah, so I think this is a problem. Like, not everyone can read what I just read and have an idea what the heck is going on. And there are a couple of reasons. First is the degradation of abstract thought, which is like an educational systematic problem. So people think philosophy is useless. They think that metaphysics and philosophy are also useless. So
Sometimes they don't even know what metaphysics actually is.
yes, yes. But so this is the first problem. Our whole education system is kind of like against this type of conversations. The second problem is that even if you don't think it's useless, even if you think it can be useful, not everyone can just be dropped in a room, read this, and say, yeah, I get it. Because look at what the heck he's saying. He's saying that something is and something, and it's synthesis at the same time. He's saying that there are forces that are contributing to a larger and greater process, and they are equal but also not equal. Um, so there are a lot of like oppositions that I think I know what he means. I think you do what he understand what he means. But not everyone will have first an understanding, and even if they do, they will not have the same understanding among everyone. So this is the problem, which is we don't have a way to communicate this properly. First, because of the education system, and second, because the language is vague enough, which is the same problem that we ran before when we were talking about usual adjectives that people use to describe the quality without a name. The language is vague enough that the lack of precision opens the margin of having different understand like okay understandings of the same thing, but different understandings. So it's hard in the multiple different layers and levels to talk about this stuff. So, uh, yeah. Yeah, and then there's the example of the window, which is like something that it has some sort of. He almost described a very vague idea of continuity, in a sense, like in a sense of a function, because he's saying that something is itself, but it's also part of a greater self. And you have a hard time understanding where something like the borders and the boundaries are established. Which, well, this is very. I heard this before in the same book that I showed multiple times about Burke. This is also something that Burke identified in his investigation about the beauty. So I heard this before. It's not new to me. It's just that it's very hard to like. I don't know if I ever experienced something like that myself.
This notion of, okay, clearly there are two things and there's some relation between them, but there's a boundary between them, but that boundary is kind of fuzzy, right? It's
Yeah,
hard to pin down where exactly it
yeah,
is.
exactly. One ends and the other starts. Like this is like something that I understand what you mean, but I don't know if I ever experienced myself. And then he goes like the window is the example, right? And then we also have the and this is also important. So he also talks about buildings having character, right? Which, well, this is natural language, so we can use some how would you call that? Language figures. Is that how you? I'm literally translating from Portuguese, but I don't know the term.
Figures of speech, that's the
Figures of
term in
speech.
English.
Yeah, so figures of speech, which in this case is personification, right? So it's the you describing a human thing on non-human things, such as character, right? So how can a building have character? But the cool thing is that I kind of understand what he means. Is like when you enter a place like a building and you look around and you say, "Hey man, this is distinguishable from everything else." Like I am gonna memorize this place because of these traits. So that's when we kind of go to the idea of like, okay, this building has character, it has a personality, it has special things about it that are memorable, and sometimes the traits are actually human as well. So I don't know, being too spacious, being too like to me that puts more into the idea of being agreeable because if you have more space, you can tolerate more stuff.
Yep.
So those are like the psychological things that go into like which well nobody thinks about that anymore because well first because buildings are kind of boring nowadays and second because they think that making these type of associations and looking for isomorphisms between different domains that are that far apart, only crazy people try to do that, and they are usually psychotic.
Well,
So
jokes on them. It's those crazy people. It's those crazy people who actually advance the state of the art at the end of the day. So,
I also have that understanding, but well, maybe we are both crazy, and I'm fine with that reality.
ah, being normal is kind of overrated.
I wouldn't say it's kinda. I think it's 100% overrated. Okay, but then we go to another thing. The possibly disturbing implications for software if we were to take Alexander at face value is that there is no modularity at any level. Our definition of abstraction allows for variations in abstractions, but systematic ones. Is this definition flexible enough to capture the sense of freedom we get from this description? For example, in his description for window, we can sense that every part of the abstraction is a little different in each instance, depending on the forces at work at the window side. Instances of classes can acquire some of this flavor by varying the state of each object, each one different according to its own the system. But is this enough? Yeah. Um, yeah, and then we go to the part that although yeah, so then we go to the idea of like, okay, maybe Maybe in order to accommodate these descriptions to software, we need to drop our expectations a little bit. But then we go to the problem that Alexander himself failed to communicate this properly, and then we have this psychological, no, not psychological, but this text which talks about the human psychology in here.
Yep.
Um, well, Alexander himself declared that he thought he described what he's talking about, but he actually didn't, in fact, which is not surprising. It's very hard. Um, so Alexander was surprised that people didn't understand that the geometrical nature of his pattern language is fundamental. He felt he always knew that the geometry had to be right, and he always knew that he could tell quickly that it was right or wrong. Again, it's about recognition. I don't even think that after the experiment failed, he fully appreciated the importance of the geometry. Certainly not to the extent he seems in his study of the carpets, which we're going to go through in the next part of this. Um, and then he goes that the problem wasn't obvious that in the experiment wasn't obviously that everything was fine except for a lack of appreciation for geometry. It was that and also that the general skill level was low, and the families participating in the design were unfamiliar with the language and the process. And again, we go back to the question: are the families the problem because it was not? They were trying to make the most habitable thing for them, are the families the problem, or is Alexander the problem? Again, I keep bringing this question because I think it's very hard to say which one is in the wrong. But if Gabriel wants to declare that we need to make habitable software, but habitable for who? Who is the most important question in his thesis? And I don't think that's clear in his approach yet.
Yeah, it's very fuzzy.
Alexander began to believe that maybe there was more to the geometry than he even he appreciated. Then okay, and then we go to the carpets thing. So this is the beginning of the premise that this can be an objective thing and not a subjective thing, and that's where I kind of get lost because I don't know, I don't understand these numbers. Do you?
Uh,
Okay, before you will be going to that. So
it's been a while since I actually read this chapter, so I kind of forget. Let me take a look at that again.
yeah. Anyway,
That
so in Harvard, Alexander performed an experiment in 1960s, in the 60s, where he presented some strips to people and asked them some what is the most coherent and simple to the least coherent and simple. And my understanding is that he left the meaning of these two words up to the reader, up to the person taking the experiment, which is even more impressive considering the result. Um, so if there was a good agreement among the subjects about which were simpler and more coherent, then we have more faith in the premise that there is an objective quality that you're going to call it holiness or coherence or simplicity. And that was the case. So there was a common agreement that from the top left to the bottom right, going from the left to the right, are the most coherent to the least coherent. And then at first glance, it kind of seemed random, right? So if you look at those, but then there is a way to explain the cases, which is called the subsymmetries. So we have a symmetrical subsegment. Coherence is strongly correlated with the number of the subsymmetries. Here's how you calculate the number. Consider all the subsegments of sizes 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. There is one subsegment of length 7, two of length 6, um,
yeah, this is basically all the ways that you can slice this thing into like shorter strips, I guess.
oh, but you are also considering the mirror then. Like if
No,
I
no, no, no,
slice
no.
here, no, if I have this and I slice here, I have and I'm gonna have a 6 and a 2. But if I do like this, it's count as one still.
That's not quite it. It's more like, okay, how many different ways there are to slice this so that you have a segment of length 7? There's just one, right? It's the entire thing. How
Yes.
many different ways can you slice it so that you have segment of length 6? Well, there are two. You can slice off either the right end or the left end, right?
Oh, so they are not okay. So the mirrors also count. I see. Okay, this
And
makes
then you
sense.
just yeah, and then you just do that until you reach length 2, and you don't do length 1 because everything is trivially symmetric in that case.
Yes. So then we have, here's are the subsegments of length 3. So we have, again, we have 7 in total, so you can slice here, 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 and here. Now we simply count the number of subsegments that are symmetric. And when we say that, are we saying that we're going to pick the, like, these three things and see if it's reversed and
Wait,
symmetrical?
did you say there are 7? No, there are only 5 actually.
5 what?
Segments of length 3.
I didn't say 7. I said that we have 7 like squares.
Oh right, 7 squares. There are
Yeah.
7 squares indeed.
Yeah, but my question is now we simply count the number of subsegments that are symmetric. So are we grabbing like these three squares on the, oh, you can see my mouse. So
I
the,
can't.
yeah, so the one on the left, the most left one. We have three things like highlighted in there. We're gonna pick
Yeah, we
those
just
three things and see if they are symmetric. Like if you flip, it's to the same.
yes, you do that for every possible subsegment of this 7 length strip,
Okay.
basically.
Okay, so now let's go to the numbers because that's where I get lost. So uh, a subsegment is symmetric if it looks the same reversed. Let me repeat the previous figure with the number of subsymmetries to the right of each strip. So how do we have 9 subsymmetries in the first one?
Well, if you do the slicing thing that he just mentioned, and you just count all the subsegments that are symmetric, that's how many you get. So the
But
entire thing is obviously symmetric, right?
yeah, so the entire thing is 1. It counts as 1.
Yes, that's the subsegment of
Okay.
length 7, which there's only one.
Okay.
If you do length 6, then neither of them is symmetric in that case, right?
Yes, neither of them are symmetric. Yes.
If you do length 5, then there's one that's symmetric, uh, but the other two are not.
Also yes.
So that's two symmetries so far. You just keep doing that for every possible size until you reach two.
Okay, so that
And
was my problem. So you actually have the control of the slicing. You do it from like 1/6 all the way up to 3/4.
yeah, you just do all possible ways of slicing this into a particular size for all possible subsizes.
Mhm.
And you
Mhm.
exclude size 1 because that's always symmetric, and you just say, okay, for this size there's one symmetry, for this size there's none, for this other size there's one, and you just keep doing that until you run out of possible
Mhm. Mhm.
segments.
Yeah, the problem is that if the counting is kind of off because there is definitely a tendency of going from the top left to the bottom right, but it's not perfect. So for example, we go from an 8 to a 6 and but we have sevens in the first column. So like there is a direction, definitely there is a direction if you look at the like how the numbers are distributed, which is definitely in the diagonal from top left to bottom right, but it's not perfect.
Yeah,
Uh,
and he actually does get into that, actually.
yeah, he actually talks about like we can reorder this to be better. Uh, it seems that people prefer symmetries that appear on all levels. So in the formula, small symmetries count as much as larger ones. The first strip, upper left, has symmetries all over the place, and it is pleasing to look at. But is it really more coherent than the one at the bottom of the first column, which is the 7 here, right?
Yeah.
It seems more regular in some ways, but it's certainly more interesting. It seems more complex, but it seems easier to remember, since there is a simple alternation rather than the 1 2 1 2 1 of the other, which is the 7 1.
Yep.
Maybe it's more coherent. The idea of symmetries seems to take into account, perhaps a little too simplistically. But well, this is still evidence that maybe there is an objective measurement that we can make to establish like a universal objective thing.
Yep.
Um, when we look at his carpets, we see the same thing. I spent a lot of hours playing with some variations of his computation and found that one that correlated slightly better with the experimental data, which fits his remarks on rugs as well. My computation adds additional bias in favor of double outer boundaries that diminishes exponentially as the boundary grows smaller. For example, a strip like this has a bias added to its subsymmetry count. And this serves to boost the score of the strip that is started from the top in the first column and the one at the bottom of the same column. But improvement is marginal. Yeah, so we played with it, but that didn't help.
Yep.
Uh, okay, now we're gonna go to the carpets, which is where I think it's more fun than the strips. Uh, so then we're gonna have Alexander's appreciation, and less scientific and less research based of the on the carpets. And then we're gonna talk about centers, whatever that means. In general, the results they are a little less compelling as argument, but we're gonna go through them anyway. Um, he went through financial trouble to get the carpets. You should. That's
he,
not financial advice. Okay, that's not financial advice.
he became a rug dealer. uh,
That's funny. Um, when people started telling me this, I began to look. This what? That that his carpets had some special something. I
yep.
began to look more carefully to discover that there was indeed something I was attracted to in a half-conscious way. It seemed to me that the rugs I tended to buy exuded or captured an incredible amount of power, which I did not understand, but which I obviously recognize. See? That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
Yep.
In the course of buying more rugs, I made a number of discoveries. And then he discovered that you could. I discovered that you could not tell if a rug has this special, what he called a spiritual quality, until you had been with it for about a week. I began to be aware that there were certain geometrical properties that were predictors of this spiritual property. So one that leads to the other. We don't know yet if one causes the other, but one that is usually uh, with the company of the other.
It's correlated in some way
Yeah.
that we don't understand.
I made a shocking discovery that you could actually look at the rug in a sort of superficial way and just see if it had certain geometrical properties, and if it did, you could be almost certain that it had this spiritual property as well. So this is the causality premise. So one, if you have one, you're gonna have the other. Actually, no,
Either
this is
be
still not causality. This is still correlation. You're right.
yeah. We don't know if one causes the other or if there's a common cause for both of them.
Exactly. And then he wrote a book about it, which Gabriel apparently read. But we cannot see the reproduction of the arts in the book, unfortunately. But he's gonna do his best. Uh, so then, well, he's gonna make some comments about how the book is kind of weird. Uh, um, I still think it's worth reading this part. So, in short, the small structure, the detailed organization of matter, controls a microscopic level at a way that architects have hardly dreamed of. But 20th century art has been very bad at handling this level. We have become used to a conceptual approach to building, in which, like cardboard, large superficial slabs of concrete or glass or painted sheetrock or plywood create very abstract forms at a very big level. But they have no soul because they have no fine structure at all. It means directly that if you hope to make buildings in which the rooms and buildings feel harmonious, we too must make sure that the structure is correct down to 1/8 of an inch. Any structure which is more gross and which leaves this last eighth of an inch rough or uncalculated or inharmonious will inevitably be crude. So we need to be detail focused essentially.
Yep.
Um, and well, this is something that the artists of the past probably understood it better than today, and they understood it to the point of being intuitive to them. And carpets provide a way to study this mastery because they are pure design, pure ornament, and their construction is so completely unconstrained by the materials of their construction, as well as the artist's true mastery to come forward. Yeah, so they're so simple that there's nothing really preventing you of putting your best on the table. Um, This is just a bitmap, but as we see, with perhaps quite a number of color bits per pixel. And then we go with the whole, again, religious approach of like the carpet being a way to materialize your faith, to put into the word your faith to the religious figure. And then, well, this is also like a time in which the color and the carpet itself they had some sort of relationship because they were made by the same a single person with the was performing the two roles of the master dyer and the master weaver. And there's actually a very funny comment. Yeah, such a master dyer served a 15-year apprenticeship, after which the apprentice was required to produce a color no one had seen before. That's very fucking like badass, man. This is
It
badass.
is. It is.
Like, imagine asking for such a thing today. That would be very hard. Only after that could the apprentice become a master. Alexander notes that this training is the equivalent today of training a theoretical physicist, followed by training as a brain surgeon. Perhaps a dyer did not learn as much as someone would for either of those two professions, but it certainly says a lot about the importance of the dyer to Turkish society. So this is the amount of effort that it takes to acquire such mastery and craftsmanship to this degree. And now we're gonna go to the wholeness concept of for the carpets because Alexander talks with this metric, so the centers and the wholeness. Both the animal being which comes to life in a carpet and the inner light of its color depend directly on the extent to which the carpet achieves wholeness in its geometry. The greater carpets are quite simply the carpets which achieve the greatest degree of wholeness within themselves. So this wholeness would be an objective concept. It has nothing to do with preference, and so we need to know more about it now because now if it's objective, there's something to measure the wholeness, and that's where the center is going to come into place. If you had to choose one of the two carpets as a picture of your own self, then which one of the two carpets would you choose? Like this is a very like he said unusual. I'm gonna upgrade that to weird. Unweird, like unusual slash weird question because you are obligating the person with the receiving this question from their end. They need to establish a mapping of some sort. It's almost like which one is more isomorphic to you. It's almost like
Yeah.
asking that question. Uh, if you, in case you find hard to ask the question, let me clarify by asking you to choose the one which is better able to represent your whole being, the essence of yourself, good and bad, all that is human in you. And then we have the true thing, the true proposed carpets. And then Gabriel thought that he would be able to bamboozle him, but he was wrong. He actually picked the one that Alexander said he would. Of course, that's some motivation to feel nervous about it, which is fair, right? So it's very fair to feel nervous when someone predicts to that degree your choice.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, so we still don't have the pictures yet, but okay. Well,
I think
then
they
we
come
have some
later.
yeah, we're gonna have some explanations here about some like descriptions about the carpets. I don't think that those are actually that much important now. Uh, let's continue. Um, okay. Well, but then he got like sidetracked to the other carpet, right? So I looked at the left-hand one. It was partially destroyed, and there was some different characteristics about it. But he actually didn't notice he was looking at that for like 10 minutes. Um, but it was clear that the first work was more profound and impressive to a trained eye, but he was really wanted to keep looking at the second one. And then he said, I got them, like got him. But then Alexander doubled down. I believe almost everyone, after careful thought, which is the left one. Uh, and then, well, he predicted Gabriel once again. Um, and then he continued reading the book, right? And then the
Yep.
book, and then okay, so the book is divided into theoretical discussion of where the quality of the wholeness comes from, discussion of dating the carpets and how they fit into the progression, pictures and descriptions of the carpets themselves, and finally comparisons. Um, and that in which Alexander showed us how far the art has degenerated. I want to talk only about the origins of the wholeness. Now we're going to go to the centers. So if you look at it, how you're going to see how whole it is. You're going to count the centers, and you're going to see how they behave between themselves, among themselves. So as a first approximation, a center may be defined as a psychological entity which is perceived as a whole and which creates the feeling of a center in the visual field. So here's an example. So how many centers do we see here?
Quite a few actually.
Yeah, so I don't know if, because, well, how am I going to identify them to see if we are getting the same. So there is a center between the diamonds and the, well, these are not circles, so these are like hexagons or whatever, hexagons.
I think they're octagons actually.
Okay, so there is a center with the octagons and the diamonds. There is also one between the octagon, the gray slash black octagons between the diamonds themselves. So you have one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight octagons also, and they have their centers. There's also centers between the black thingies, like surrounding the main, the main things, the main thing, which is like touching the diamonds a little bit as well. And there's also
Um,
the center coming from the whole white stuff to the octagon in the middle. So like you keep doing this type of process,
yeah.
and it has a stronger center, which of course is in the middle. Each of the lighter octagons and diamonds forms another center. The darker dots at the centers of the smaller blossoms form others. And then he says the asymmetrical black leaves are where. What are you calling leaves in this?
Asymmetrical black leaves.
Are we talking about the black stuff? Like, oh man, you can see my mouse, but
Around, yeah,
yeah,
there's those things that are like in that field of white, the breaking
yeah.
up the,
Okay,
yeah,
so you're calling
that.
those leaves. Okay. Okay, but then
Uh,
there is also the. Okay, go.
there's also the, you know those little points in that diamond in the middle where you have a meeting of three lines? I think those are also centers actually.
Wait. The repeat the description because I didn't get it.
Like, you know that octagon in the center, right? The very center one.
Yes, yes.
If you follow the, if you follow outwards through each of the edges, there's that black line between the outer octagons, the dark gray ones, right? But there's a point where there's a meeting of three line segments, right at the very edge of the darker center, where like it's a common edge between the two outer octagons, but also that ends in the, you know that how can I say this? It's almost like there's a star in the middle. Each of the points of the star is a center, essentially.
Wait. I see the star. Where is the center?
Each point of the star is also a center. It's a meeting of three lines in a very conspicuous way, I guess.
Ah, I see. I see. You're trying. Okay, so for the recording purposes, he's talking about these like ninja shuriken in the middle here. That like the point in which the size of the octagons, they have three lines because you have a side, and the intersect in the where they're touching each other. There are three lines like kind of doing this.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Y shape.
Yeah, like this. And then that is a center. Yes, that's true.
Uh, yeah.
Okay, we also have this one, which has a very interesting comment, which is that this form is a center because of the hexagonal archway, the steps. So the very top of this door, then we have the steps like in here, the arms with hexagons on the at the ends, which are kind of weird, and the lily at the top, which is well at the very top, not because of the overall shape, but I don't think that's the like I don't know if I agree with that. That this form is on a center not because of the overall shape. I think it is. Am I wrong?
Uh, like if you look at the entire thing clearly, it's like you would need more context to say whether this entire thing could be a center. By itself, it clearly can't. Like because of it feels like how can I say it? It feels like there's if you look at the bottom, it's like there's something missing there.
Yeah, I agree that I have a feeling that there is a greater center, like that is not being depicted in the picture. But I still can see centers in this.
It has centers, but the point is that the overall thing is not a center. As you said,
Mm,
there's a it could be a center if you give it more context, but just this thing by itself, like the whole thing is not a center.
I see. Uh, the next point Alexander makes is that for wholeness, it isn't that a carpet has a single center, but it has a multiplicity of centers that reinforce one another by influence and by their structure, and that's what makes the difference. The degree of wholeness which a carpet achieves is directly correlated to the number of centers which it contains. The more centers it has in it, the more powerful and deep its degrees of wholeness. So in fact, the more centers there are and more intertwined and interlaced they are, the more whole the carpet becomes because the centers are denser. At the top of the next page is another example. Both the dark design elements and lighter background form centers whenever there is a convex spot, linear parts cross, or at bends. Yeah, you can see like this is the first one that I can see centers that are asymmetrical.
Yeah, this is a very nice shape.
Which is very interesting because my first instinct was to say, no man, they need to be symmetrical to be centers. But then I looked at this and said, no, these thingies at the bottom there that are doing like this, they
They're almost they're almost like brackets, plus sign in the middle.
yeah, but they have centers in the absence of space, like in the background.
Yeah,
But they are symmetrical as well, which is kind of cool. Um, So then we have more identifying more properties about this. So most centers are symmetrical. This means they have at least one bilateral bilateral symmetry. Even when centers are asymmetrical, they are always composed of smaller elements of centers which are symmetrical. Uh, all centers are made of many internal local symmetries, which produce smaller centers within the larger center and have a very high internal density of local symmetries. It is this property which gives them their power. Yeah, so you have centers among centers, almost like a fractal.
yeah.
So you keep zooming in, and you're gonna find even more. Let's actually try that. I haven't done that yet. Let's go all the way here. Yeah, so almost like these things. So if you zoom in, yeah, like
Yeah.
these particularly. I remember when we were doing this because we implemented in such a way that every time you zoom, you actually recompute the entire thing. Because, well, that's how you make them infinite. And then there were some of these things in the middle, and I found them pretty cool. And they have like there are many centers in this thing, man. Like
Too many to count even.
yeah, many centers. Uh, Yeah, so this is another example. And there are centers asymmetrical here as well. So pretty cool. Pretty freaking cool. Um, okay. Uh, it's saying here that look at it quickly and decide whether it is symmetric. And it's saying looking closely at it, it's clear that it is crudely symmetric, but it's enough for most people to see it very symmetric. Is this not symmetric? Like to me, although the colors are kind of off, it's clearly symmetric to me.
Not quite. The shapes don't quite match up if you try to fold it in half.
But that's the thing, which we're gonna go with next, right? They don't need to be 100%. That's why I think he added the crudely.
Yep.
Because if you're going pedantically, you're gonna say that yeah, this bottom thing is not the same as the up thing. Like you can pretty much go pedantically and say no, it is asymmetrical.
Actually, the main thing that makes me say that this is not symmetric properly is the, you know, those bits in between the arms of the cross.
Yes,
Yeah, if you focus on those, they clearly have vaguely similar shape, but they are also quite different from
but
the ones on the other
but that's the
side.
thing. No, but that's the thing. To me, it was an obvious yes, but like again, crudely. There's actually something remarkable. It is not just that the crudeness of this form, both in the original and in the reproduction, does not get in the way of its beauty. In fact, it enhances the beauty. And then this kind of puts us in a very fuzzy situation because we are basically establishing that having errors, like what would be classified pedantically as like mistakes, a lack of proportion, etc. He's making the argument that the existence of those things actually improves this. And I actually don't know because my first instinct is to say no, those are mistakes. But I haven't like I have never had the experience of looking at something, liking it, and after detecting the imperfections. I never did that experiment, so I don't know if this matters to me in particular.
Uh, there's something that this he actually mentions this at some point, but it's like, oh, actually, it's the, yeah, it's actually in that very next quote, in fact.
Yeah, we have become used to almost fanatical precision in the construction of buildings. Tile work, for instance, must be perfectly aligned, perfectly square, every tile perfectly cut, and the whole thing accurate on a grid to a tolerance of a sixteenth of an inch. But our tile work is dead and ugly, without soul. In a Mexican house, the tiles are roughly cut. The wall is not perfectly plumb, and the tiles don't even line up properly. Sometimes one tile is as much as half of an inch behind the next one in the vertical plane. But that's the thing. The argument being made is that those
No, no,
imperfections
no,
are
no, no,
actually
no, no.
part of the perfection.
Yeah, no, the final paragraph in there is actually the main point.
No, but it's gonna say exactly what I said, right? So I believe that they simply knew what is important and what is not. They took good care to pay attention only to what is important: the color, the design, the feeling of the tile and its relationship to the next. The important things that create the harmony and feeling of the wall. The plumb and the alignment can be quite rough without making any difference. So they didn't bother to spend too much effort on these things. They spent they spent their effort in the way that made the most difference. And so they produce this wonderful quality, this armor, simply because that is what they paid attention to and what they tried to produce. Yeah, this is actually like it's even a stronger statement, even bolder, because it's saying that the precision, there are areas such as proportion, such as, well, not proportion necessarily, but alignment, accuracy, all those things. We establishing that those things matter less. And now those craftsmen, they spent the time where it matters most. My thing is that I don't even know if I agree with that, because if you look at this, especially stuff like this, you're not gonna see like problems in proportions, problems in alignment. The only reason that this is misaligned is because I took the print like that. But if you look closely, you can establish that no, this thing actually can be perfectly aligned, perfectly like everything. It's just a matter of taking the photo, you see. But we see this as like great. Fractals are great, but I don't know if fractals have this priority concern, because this is essentially what he's making the argument. You 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 yeah, this is a prioritization thing, and apparently the things that matter less, we don't care enough about them.
Uh, well,
Uh,
I could make the argument that your print, even if it was properly centered, it still wouldn't be perfect because there's a potentially infinite amount of detail that you can expand on if you zoom in mathematically that this PNG doesn't capture because it's rasterized.
no, 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 but yes, that's true, but my argument would be, okay, let's make the print perfect, like aligned, symmetrical, because right now it's clearly like not
The
aligned.
point is the point is that this lack of alignment doesn't matter. The print is still beautiful even though it's off center.
No, no, but that's the thing. In this particular case, it doesn't matter. How can you say that for everything?
Well, clearly some things matter. It's just not all of them.
No, but that's a different thing, Marin. You're changing his argument. His argument is that there are a couple of properties that we always will care less about. My understanding is that he's saying that there are things like we are basically like fanatical about precision on everything, and there are things that never matter, such as these examples
It's
here.
not it's it's not that they never matter, it's just that they don't matter as much as we may think they do.
Okay, so it's basically saying that this is misaligned and this doesn't matter. But if it's more misaligned, then it starts to matter more.
Yeah, if you look very carefully at the last paragraph, there's one specific phrase that I think may help you understand. You see, he says the plumb and the alignment can be quite rough without making any difference. It's not that they can be completely arbitrary. They can be quite rough, only quite rough. You see?
Okay, so the argument goes like they can be somewhat wrong, somewhat imperfect, but that doesn't matter in the big picture of things, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. In our time, many of us have been taught to strive for an insane perfection that means nothing. That's such a phrase. To get wholeness, you must try instead to strive for this kind of perfection, where things that don't matter are left rough and unimportant, and the things that really matter are given deep attention. This is a perfection that seems imperfect, but it is a far deeper thing. So that's the thing. The question now is how to judge now. Because if you're going to pay less attention to stuff that matters less and more attention to stuff that matters more, how are you going to judge what matters more and what matters less?
That's very difficult, Lemos.
That is exactly the question that I asked. No, not exactly, but this is a kind of the same kind of question to what I asked Mageta, right? So if you have a process that you use to judge stuff, how can you judge the process itself? Because well, I was putting to question the whole forms thing from Aristotle for Mageta, right? And then I ask, how do you know that that makes? How do you know that that's okay? To me, he's using reasoning to judge that. But he said that that both empirical evidence and reasoning are subject to something else. And then I said, how do you judge that something else is correct then? And this is kind of like a similar question to this, like if you think about it, because this I'm basically asking, okay, we're gonna pay more attention and less attention to stuff, but how are we gonna judge that? The whole recursion thing, asking the question on the thing itself. Um, no, anyway, the they must, yeah. So basically, the centers must exist at all levels of the scale. Carpets with all the other characteristics of wholeness for wholeness, but lacking centers at all levels will
Yeah,
not achieve wholeness, so can be boring. Uh, says Marinho?
yeah, no, this whole all levels of detail. Yeah, it seems to have some kind of deep relationship with fractals.
Yeah, definitely. A center will become distinct and strong only when it contains within itself another center and also strong, and no less than half its own size. Um okay, so this is true not only for the same reasons it is true in the strips, but also because without larger structure, the design cannot hold together. It becomes merely a jumble of isolated design elements each of which might hold attention, but without the large glue, it will not be calm and whole. It would be like gluing together several masterpiece paintings at the edges. With this definition, it is apparent that the goal of the carpet is to present a single center, which necessarily must be constructed from the other centers that support it. Huh. Man, isn't then. Damn. Okay, so here's a crazy idea. So if the whole thing should have a single center that is like the main center that everything like kind of derives from.
And it's built of
Sh-
smaller centers, yes.
should like this is a crazy thought. I don't even know if it makes sense. Shouldn't the center be the database then?
How do you get to that? I mean,
Because
it's an interesting thought, but I'm wondering how you got there.
because a single main center kind of reminds me of a single source of truth. And if you really think about it, in applications, well, every application uses some sort of data. In applications such as that are heavily dependent on the user's data, for example, everything surrounding the database, which is well, the backend stuff, everything should be made respecting and like leaning towards the database because the database is what matters the most, and everything's derived from that. That's what I thought.
I
Like you have the database in the middle, and then you have everything else surrounding it, like basically like a castle with like the city surrounding the castle, and then the the side effects are like going through the gates of this. So like so the data comes in from the external world, goes to the gates, it passes through the city and reaches the castle. That's kind of how I achieve that.
I didn't consider it quite that way, but I think there's something to it. Yes, I think you might be right.
But that's another problem. But well, we need to go because it's already 1 hour and 30 minutes. Let's try to finish this. So then we're gonna another example using the with the notion of strong use of positive space. Um, and then we go to Escher, right? Which is I'm not gonna say familiar, but I know this guy because of Godel Escher Bar, right? So Godel Escher Bar, which every software developer should read. I read this. It has like 1,000 pages, but it's great. I like this book, and I gifted Mageta a copy of this. Uh, anyway, so the shapes of white convexities are strong as the black convexities that are white convexities. Yeah, so we're basically saying that the background and the foreground are contributing just as strong to each other.
Yeah,
Um, okay. Uh, yeah, so these are more properties about the centers, and then we have the definition of center, the proof definition. Every successful center is made of a center surrounded by a boundary which is itself made of centers. So this is like a recursive definition, which is not a problem for us necessarily.
I really like this picture, by the way.
This one, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it has centers, a lot of centers in the foreground and some centers in the background as well. Um, And then yeah, I think this paragraph is important. The greatest structures, the greatest centers are created not within the framework of a standard pattern, no matter how dense the structures it contains, but in a more spontaneous frame of mind in which the centers lead to other centers and the structure evolves almost with its own accord under completely autonomous or spontaneous circumstances. Under these circumstances, the design is not thought out, conceived. It springs into existence almost more spontaneously in the process by which it is made. Yeah, I have a problem with this, which is I don't think, like, if we take it literally, I don't think that's sustainable, aside from art, because because
But programming is art.
I know, but the problem is that we cannot like if you're creating software just for the art of it, that's one thing. But I'm trying to go to the scenario in which we're going to use this to create a product or a company. I don't think this is sustainable because there are already some footsteps that were left from previous experience of other developers throughout history that I think we should take those into account instead of trying to freestyle the entire thing. There are some guidelines. That's what I mean. So the first time I read, I noticed this is when like creating fiction. So some authors, such as I think the Game of Thrones one, already said in an interview that the story kind of made itself. The quotes that we're gonna get here about like I just want to know what happens in the end. That's something that I think the author of Game of Thrones said that the story kind of evolved by itself in a particular direction, and he was basically just writing it down and like receiving the input from somewhere else. My problem, and this is a particular way of writing a story. The other way of writing a story is if you plan most things. So you write the thing and then you reverse the order of events. You make the twists. You already know what everything is gonna happen and when and why and how, and that requires some planning, right? And my understanding is that how are you gonna make the most insane twists in the story if you're doing the first way? Because the first way will
Well,
how
you
like
there is actually you just have to be very careful about what you make clear and what you don't.
yeah, but you're gonna ask yourself why I'm making this unclear. And if you say, oh, because there's a potential twist in here, this is already planning the future. This is already waiving the thing that is yet to happen. How are you gonna make a foreshadowing thing if you don't know what's going to happen?
Well, you don't have to make a foreshadowing deliberately. You can note some detail at some point, and it may become irrelevant later, or it may come back in some form and become a foreshadowing retroactively.
But how, like, ask yourself, you have the opportunity of making something clear, and you are purposely making it clear. Making that a possibility means to me that you are thinking or at least considering the future. Like, to me, you cannot argue the opposite. Because if you make something unclear with no reason, that's just bad writing, no?
It could be that it's unclear because it's not relevant at this point enough to be made clear.
Wait, so the idea would be that you're making something clear now,
Because it's
just
not
because it
relevant
doesn't
yet.
matter.
It doesn't matter yet. It may matter in the future, and then you come back to it, you see?
Yeah, so the idea would be that you're essentially exploiting your previous. Uh, that sounds like bad writing. Like, it sounds like something that was never ever mentioned, ever considering, or even the thought was there. And out of nothing, you made something because you had to make something happen, you know? Like, it's essentially when you're absorbing like any fiction and then something happened and you know and you ask yourself, man, This is so much convenience. Like there was no evidence at all that this could be possible, and out of nothing, out of thin air, this happened. That to what you said to me sounds like
That's
that.
that's not quite it, I don't think. But I don't know if I can actually explain it better.
Because foreshadowing is essentially a way to say that there is something in here that attention seeker people that pay attention will pick it up, and people that are distracted by something else will have their mind blown. Foreshadowing is putting in evidence for the smart ones. What you said is basically like, oh, I didn't explain this because it doesn't matter at the moment, but later this will matter, and it will not
it's
sound random.
it's not that later this will matter. It's that later it may matter, and if it does, it will retroactively become foreshadowing, and if it doesn't, it's just a detail.
That's not how foreshadowing works. You cannot just say, uh, actually not say something, and like in the sense that you didn't even put into the mind of the reader of the audience that this is possible. You just left there and like you didn't nobody cared, and later you actually use the fact that nobody cared, and you wanted to retroactively say that, oh, that shit that didn't have any importance, and I didn't even give you a hint for example, the whole Star Wars thing about Palpatine return. I think you know what I'm talking about, right?
Uh, that's from episode 3, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, not 3, 6. When Palpatine was like dropped into the um, intricacies of the Death Star, and the Death Star exploded. Nobody saw that he died. Nobody saw that he would exploded with the thing. So you didn't. Nobody that was not depicted in the movie. But later, on episode 9, 3 episodes later, they said that, oh, he returned. Nobody showed you that he died, but it was implied, right? But there was no evidence. There was no concrete evidence of his corpse dead.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about.
But that's the thing. To me, if you don't put detail enough on something that doesn't matter right now, and later you exploit that because you want to do a foreshadowing without planning, how are you not gonna run into those situations of like, this seems like just convenience?
Is it
That's my
convenient
problem.
though?
Well, of course it is. In 2019, when they launched the ninth episode, they needed a villain. It was hecka convenient. Of course, in that case, it's more egregious. It's even worse because that had an implication of like he was dropped into the Death Star. The Death Star exploded. How could you survive that? So there was an implication there, which makes the case even more egregious. In your case, not necessarily, right? So the story is happening, and there is like something that I'm not describing, or like I'm being shallow about it, right? And then the story progresses, and then later on, I decide to actually exploit the fact that I didn't before of explaining that. And but to me, imagining me as an audience of such thing, I would think to myself, man, this is just very convenient, no? Like it just so happens that the city that you didn't explain properly back then has a special thing that now matters the most for the story. There was no evidence, there was no hint. It just so happened. That's my fear. Like, can you not run into that if you don't plan ahead? Like, I'm not a writer. I tried and I suck. But I cannot imagine not planning. Like, that's something that I cannot understand. My whole point about this whole tangent that we went through, which is that to me it's very bold to say that let's not plan. Let's just see how it goes. Like, if you have the luxury of not having time and money constraints, such as the game that we made. Like, we are not game developers. We made a game in Zig, and we discovered stuff as we went through the development. That's fine, but I would not be fine with that if those were our jobs. That's the thing. Like, if you have the luxury of allowing the software to develop itself and going through the pitfalls, that's understandable. But I still think that not following any guidelines in any time, that's
It's
kind of
not
sus.
it's not really that you're not following any guidelines. You are following the guidelines of what has been previously established.
No, that's exactly the opposite of what is being said here. It's an spontaneous process. It's saying here. So how can you say there are guidelines?
Well, clearly the process doesn't happen all at once. It's a process, right?
Sure,
What comes before can affect what comes later.
but if it's autonomous and spontaneous outside of your control, how do you know? Why should you care about uh, what happened before? How can you guarantee that the process? Because that's the thing, you don't have control over that, right? The process is the process. You are writing the code, and the code is trash or not, and stuff needs to change according to what was produced. But you don't know what's ahead, right? What I mean with guidelines is having a strong suspicion of what is ahead.
Hmm.
And it's going to be repeated after this. So this process corresponds more closer to a condition under which a carpet is actually woven. So since like you cannot backtrack. There's no Control Z when woven a carpet. You
Yes.
like after you done the thing, you done the thing, and you have to cope with the consequences of that, right? My proposal would be to plan the guy to have some planning about the final look of the carpet. Since working row by row, not by knot, and having to create a design as it goes along without ever seeing the whole until the carpet itself is actually finished. This condition, which would seem to place such constraint and difficulty on the act of creation, is in fact just the circumstance in which the spontaneous, unconscious knowledge of the maker is most easily released from the domination of thought. So, like, isn't this just freestyle? And I'm not saying freestyle is bad. I'm just saying that most of us can't do that. Like, am I wrong in saying that it's one thing to let a professional artist have any like improvise in a concert? That's one thing. Having another one that is less experienced, less knowledgeable, improvise in the middle of like a million people concert, that's a different thing. I understand that creativity, improvisation, unconscious knowledge of the maker being released, that's great stuff. I'm just saying that maybe we're not the correct makers to attempt such a thing in the beginning. Maybe. Maybe in the future, maybe. But not now. Most of us not now, for sure.
What does that say about the fact that you called me out on freestyling twice by this point? uh,
What do you mean?
like like just this Friday, I was like, oh, we need to change here, and it was like, yeah, remember on when we were doing Karuta, right?
Hmm.
I did a change, and you were like, dude, that's just freestyling or something. Not in the disparaging way, but more in the sense of, oh, like you just went off of intuition essentially.
No, no, no. Okay, that's actually a good example. Why I pointed that out? Because you were you were deliberately making changes in the most complicated piece of code of the compiler. Right. I was the one that last saw the final look of that code because I was the one that refactored it. And there is a lot of recursion going on there. It's basically like there's a tangled mess that I don't think we can avoid in the code generator. And you were particularly going to the handcrafted pieces that we both made in the past. We tested that shit out, right? And you were changing a fundamental part of it.
Is
Uh,
is it
like
really that fundamental if I just tweak which instruction it's spitting out in a particular circumstance?
yes, because that changes the potentially changes the future, right? If you change which instruction you are supposed to generate, you're gonna jump to the different place potentially. You're gonna have the different branches. The evaluator is directly affected by that. Remember, there are instructions that depend if you have seen something else before. So changing if you had a unified value first, a unified variable last, that changes the behavior of the output considerably potentially. So I was very and again, I didn't complain that you changed it. I actually didn't even make complaints. I just made a comment that, dude, this is the most complicated piece of software of this project, and you are literally just going there and changing unified value to get whatever. Don't you think that's freestyling? Like that to me, it sounds like freestyling. Come on.
Is it really freestyling if you know exactly why you're making the change, even if you can't properly express it?
That's the thing. Um, to me, it was not. And maybe this was my fault. I was doing something else at the time, right? While you were writing those things. Um, my problem was that to me it was not really clear that we identified 100% certainty or 90 plus percent certainty this is the place that needs to change.
Well, I was looking at what the
And by the way,
compiler.
you didn't do intuition per se as only. You actually did a grep, checked the places that were using producing that instruction. There were only two places. The one, it's on a partial applied function, whatever, so it was definitely not there. And the other one was the place that you ended up changing. So you had like, which is good to like in your argument of like, okay, it's okay to freestyle, right? Because there's only a few places. But to me, I was anxious because I was like, maybe we should read from the start again and see if this is actually the place because I'm very cautious about changing anything in this file. That was kind of my thing.
That's fair. But also, that was the second time that you mentioned I was doing freestyling. The other one was when was it? It was. I don't remember exactly when. We can probably check the recordings earlier, but it was also in Karuta, incidentally. So
I
maybe
know.
I don't know. Maybe I just don't. Maybe I just get compilers in some deep way that I don't understand. But
But that may be the case, right? And again, I'm not doing a criticism because it worked at the end of the day. That's fine. I'm just saying that I I said that you were doing freestyling because the way that you approached, maybe it's also like a misconception on my side. Maybe the code generator is not the most complicated piece of software in that project. Maybe it is not a mess because to me, uh, actually calling it a mess is a little unfair. But there are many moving parts in there, and that puts me uh, anxious about not doing stuff double checking it before. But to your favor, this could actually be an instance, right? When we carefully design or work from a standard pattern, we do not achieve artifacts of the deepest meanings and wholeness. Perhaps the results are pleasant, but are eventually boring and funky. Perhaps they are commonplace and not deserve their purpose as well as they could. Alexander says that he has evidence for his bold statement, but there is not enough room for now. And this is also the way the best creative writing is done. When you sit down and in your writing place, sometimes you're transformed into a mere scribe as the power of the story or poem takes over. It is an adventure to see where it will lead. Many writers have a ritual or set of superstitions that they hope will lead them to the magic place where the story becomes guide. Like maybe you already achieved the like maybe the gods of compilers are using you as a way to write themselves down. Like
I certainly felt like this a couple times already, so there's something to it.
Yeah,
There
so
certainly is.
like I haven't felt anything of this nature of like this is what the uh, actually that's a lie. I already have felt when the project tells me what it needs. Not in the sense that I there is a the masters are using my body as a way to write the godly word, but as a way that the project tells me, like, man, I need to have this, and this in this place. I have felt that before. I have felt that before for sure. Yeah, when asked why they write, some writers say it is to find out what happens in the end. And then the question is, can we afford this creative process in software in the software development? I think in projects that you don't have time constraints and budget constraints, like you effectively have the time and the discipline to do stuff by yourself. That's the time when this creative process is okay to happen. But how can you not have guidelines when you have a budget, when you have a time, a deadline? How can you afford to say, for example, the whole database being the center? That's to me a guideline. That's
But where
essentially
did
a guideline.
that guideline come from?
It doesn't matter. I'm not. It doesn't matter where it came from. It matters that I'm using it and I'm not letting it discover itself in front of me.
But how are you going to discover the guidelines to begin with?
That doesn't matter. What matter because there are various answers to that question. I can ask a friend. I can read a book. I can read a thesis, a PhD thesis. It doesn't matter where I got it.
Let's assume that you're doing something completely new that nobody has done before. How are you going to figure out the guideline?
But then again, if you're doing something new that has never been done before, are you do you have a deadline? Is money being spent in order to do what nobody have done before?
It might be.
That's called research, right? But even for research, you have guidelines. So, for example, uh, you should participate in conferences about the subject, even if it's a new subject, even if it's a new area. A guideline is to actually talk to people, right? Talk to other people researching the same topic. That's a guideline. You're not letting the thing tell you, hey man, you should talk to your bro in the other university.
How did you get to those guidelines to begin with, Lemos?
Again, that doesn't matter.
But it does.
Okay, so you're putting in the scenario in which nobody has ever done, and nobody's doing it at the same time as you. You are alone doing something that never seen before.
That's just an example. The point is, okay, you need to have a guideline, right? Fine. Where do the guideline comes from? It needs to come from somewhere.
Yeah, but I already gave you examples of where it can't come from. But I think your example needs to be what I said. It's the extreme that you are doing something only yourself because you cannot talk to people because that would be a guideline. You're doing something that has no prior knowledge in any form or shape, and you're doing by yourself. In that, there's only intuition and trial and error.
And then you realize that basically everything started out like that at some point.
No, yes. Yeah, again, assuming that everyone is working under those circumstances, you cannot run from trial and error and intuition. That's not the case, though. We are doing software. Like, you are doing uh, a lot of jobs are the same thing. Like, everyone is doing a website that people click buttons and they send data to another place, and there are some constraints in what the buttons can do and what the data can Actually, not even. Some people don't even care about those constraints. But what the buttons can do is something. So a lot of people are doing those things. Like the same thing, fundamentally the same shit. Are we gonna tell them there are no guidelines? Be creative. That's my thing.
I see.
And then there's another question. If we tell them no, there are guidelines, can they achieve the equality without a name in the following guidelines?
What
The,
if one of the guidelines is this cannot have the quality without a name?
no, but then that would suck. Like that would be the most terrible conclusion. That
What happens if one of the guidelines implies that and you can't tell because you don't actually understand the quality without a name, right? Because otherwise it would have a name probably.
no, no, no. I agree. Potentially there is a guideline that will make everything that, and we don't yet understand this implication that there won't be the quality without a name. But I think that the most important question is the other way around. Is the only way to achieve the quality without a name this creative process with no guidelines? Because if the answer is yes, we are all doomed. In the sense that no software that we use daily will ever achieve the quality without a name. Because what we use today are mostly certain, written, and maintained by people that are following guidelines. And that would be like one of the most terrible conclusions ever, because that would mean that everything would suck forever. Your question is also important. What if there is a guideline that impedes the quality without a name from emerging? That's also terrible. But then we at least have a solution, which is that first, consider that scenario, and second, try to find what is the guideline causing that conclusion.
But now we're back to caring about where the guidelines came from. You see the
No,
problem,
no,
Lemos?
not where they come from. Which one is the culprit one? Doesn't matter where it came from. Doesn't matter. Again,
It does.
again, it doesn't matter. Your problem that you stated is that there is a guideline that is impeding the quality without a name from appearing. Let's try to find which one. If it came from a book or it came from a thesis or it came from whatever, I don't care. Because if now we go to a more serious question, which is there a place where guidelines come from that they will always impede the quality without a name from happening? If that's your question, then the where matters. But that's not what you said before, though. You
It
said
could also be it could be the case that the guideline was reasonable in another context where it doesn't actually impede the quality without a name, but it was mindlessly transported from that context to this one where it does in fact impede the quality from appearing.
that would be another conclusion as well. So this guideline in this context sucks, but it may not suck elsewhere. Could be. Damn it. I have no water, and we are already way over time. Let's try to finish this. I think we are 4 pages far from it. So I now present the combination of the argument. This hinges on an extraordinary phenomenon and fundamental to the character of the great carpet. As a carpet begins to be a center, then gradually the carpet as a whole also begins to take the nature of being. We may also say it begins to be a picture of a human soul. The subject is delicate because it's not quite clear how to discuss and not even in what field or category to place it. It opens the door to something we can only call spirit and to the empirical fact, a fact of psychology if nothing else, that after all, when a carpet does achieve some greatness, the greatness it achieves seems to lie in the realm of the spirit, not merely in the realm of art. So yeah, so this is more like it's. I think when you reach this type of level in your with your art, it's when like your peak. And what is be a being? It's a powerful center that transcends them and the merely fascinating. It is a center that takes over and reflects the human and perhaps God's spirit. It is autonomous, a creation unto itself. And he says that this shape is impressive. I don't think if I would call this impressive, but it's cool. Yeah, I think it's
It's, a,
cool.
it's an excellent shape.
Uh, uh, well, then he says that he hopes that the 21st century will also seek for these type of works. That some form of the primitive force, the same knowledge of structure, the same desire to make a work in which the work carries and illuminates the spirit. That's not present, my brother. I'm sorry to tell you the news.
If he is still alive, he's probably sorely disappointed with the 21st century so far.
Yeah, we completely shifted to the opposite direction of anything resembling this type of stuff. So it's definitely not the case. But what this has to do with software, right? So here's a definition of a system: a set of communicating components that work together to provide a comprehensive set of capabilities. And then a system is composed of subsystems that achieve certain effects by exhibiting behavior in response to requests. The system in each subsystem are defined behaviorally according to the roles and responsibilities. Each subsystem can be viewed as a center. Man, this is very dangerous. You know why?
Why?
Because you can read these and achieve microservices.
I don't think you can actually.
I think you 100% can. 110, actually. I think people will read this and you're done. They will say that the best way to achieve this sentence is by using microservices. Oh boy. You go if
The problem with microservices and why I think they can't achieve this, even though on paper it sounds like they can, is that by definition, when you make microservices, you're trying to isolate things, right? But a center doesn't actually exist in isolation.
I think that saying that you're trying to isolate things is not correct. I think they are trying to define you. This is a very common thing to say in this context of microservices. Each thing is doing what it's supposed to be doing in its own responsibilities. You are calling the separation of responsibilities isolation, but it could be use different words and be exact. Well, at least on paper, being exactly this.
Ah, that's not quite what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is, uh,
I rather
okay,
say that the separation that they are trying to make is the wrong the definition of behavior for responsibilities. It is attempting to do this wrongly.
that's also fair to say. Uh, okay, here's the thing. Let's talk about lithium for a bit. There's a system that lets you move around the world, right?
Yeah,
Like spatially.
yeah,
And there's a system that displays your character, right?
yeah.
And there's a system that takes input and eventually converts that into an effect on the state of the world, right?
No, so yeah,
Those are all systems.
yeah.
And
But
microservices, people would not recognize them as systems. That's what I'm getting at. They have
I agree with that. I agree with that. It's the notion that a separation, like because those systems are separate. They are isolated, but they are isolated via functions in the game. They don't see that as enough for some reason.
like they are not isolated in context. Like they are all part of the same code base. They interact with each other. They they are separate, but they are connected.
I think that's a bad thing to say because you're basically making it spatial. Like if I have, like if let's say that the Zig stuff was in a separate repo from the server, they are still in the same context.
Would they be
Yes,
really?
because they respect and obey the orders of a single source of truth, the castle.
Hmm, that is true actually.
So I would say that the repo stuff doesn't matter. Physically speaking, doesn't matter. Uh,
Actually, I think there's a deeper issue why microservices don't work like this. Remember when we saw that the entire carpet is a single center that's made up of lesser centers?
yeah,
The problem with a microservice architecture is that you don't have the overall center of everything.
exactly. That's exactly what I think the correct explanation. They don't have a single center of the carpet. They see each individual center. Uh, it's an a center system. Like there's no single source of anything. Um, well, let's continue here. Uh, and then we go to the definition of system in biology and see that it's very similar in terms of the recursion. Um, the difference between a program and a system is precisely the characteristic of a system having many centers or ways of approaching it. From the vantage point of any subsystem, the rest of the system is a server, which is actually kind of funny because, again, if you take this literally, you're going to reach microservices again because look at this sentence. Come on, brother. Uh, Whereas in a program, you generally have a single way of viewing, usually from top down. And then we also have, uh, if you construct a system that can be customized, specialized, that's a framework. And then if you have a framework, you can use it for different purposes without having to recode it at all. And in this sense, the objects and the object technology provide reuse. There is no such thing as easy reuse in a general sense, in which you can stockpile components, except for the most trivial and inconsequential. Building a system is like making a carpet. It requires an enormous amount of work, concentration, inspiration, creativity. It is best done piecemeal exactly the way that the makers did the carpets, by starting with an idea and partially designing it, and then seeing where it goes. Again, my same question applies. Are we going to do this for everything? Including the things that we already have attempts and we learned from the attempts. So that's a question because I have like I have a very hard time not seeing the whole castle with the village and the surroundings type of deal, man. To me, that's the most fundamental guideline for everything. So only when in some systems does the being emerge. The framework can be used and reused, which gives the systems already their spirit. Like the best carpets, the best systems are unique, but the work will not be wasted if you can continue to use it for new but related purposes. Okay, so there is some guidelines. It is an asset and an inspiration to others who follow to try to do as well. A system can afford to be different, and perhaps over time we will develop mechanisms in our overly speed conscious programming languages and systems building languages to make it easy to produce highly differentiated and centerful systems. So he is actually, I haven't noticed this, he is actually proposing some guide, at least something. Um, what are patterns then? Just a way to remember what we've forgotten about building so that when we set out to build towns and buildings, cottages and homes, paths and place to congregate, we don't forget the stuff. We need to help create the centers to give them life, give them the quality of their name, the being that emerges at last. Okay, so in a sense, he actually set the guideline. Try to create centers, and you should have the centers should be all interconnected towards a single one. Okay, if this is the recommendation, I think you're doing great, man. Okay.
Yeah. And the lesson of this chapter is don't do microservices.
Next up is gonna be part two. I'm gonna finish the recording now. Okay.
Okay.